The Galactic Council laughed at the humans, and the humans stood up and walked out, and I, sitting in the visitors' gallery, watching the most powerful body in the galaxy decide that my people were not worth saving, saw the whole thing, and I am the one who can tell you what it actually meant, because the humans did not walk out for the reason everyone thinks. They did not walk out because they were too proud, or too powerful, or too offended to stay. They walked out because of us, because of my people. The small, doomed, written-off people that the Council had just laughed about abandoning. The humans walked out of the most important room in the galaxy, and they came to us, and I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand what kind of creature does that, and to become one. Let me tell you who we were, because you have to understand the abandoned to understand what it meant when someone refused to abandon us. My name is Oyo, and my people were nobody. I say that without bitterness now, though I said it with plenty once. We were a small species, a minor people of no strategic value and no great power, living on a world that had the terrible luck to lie in the path of something we could not stop. A slow catastrophe, a coming disaster. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that our world was going to die and we could not save ourselves, and we needed help. The kind of help only the great powers of the Galactic Council could provide. So we petitioned them. We sent our representatives, humble and desperate, to the great council that governed the civilized galaxy, and we asked, as a small people asks the mighty, for our lives, for rescue, for the great powers to spend a little of their vast capacity to save a whole species from extinction. I was part of the delegation that made that journey, and I want to tell you what it was like to travel to the council carrying the hope of a whole world, because the hope is the part that makes the rest unbearable. We had prepared for months. We had chosen our representatives carefully, the wisest and most eloquent among us, and we had crafted our petition with desperate care, going over every word because we truly believed that the right words, well chosen, might be the thing that saved us. We rehearsed. We anticipated objections and prepared answers. We told ourselves that if we could only present our case clearly enough, movingly enough, the mighty would understand and would help. The whole journey to the council, our delegation talked of little else but how to make them see. We did not yet understand that the problem had never been that the council couldn't see. The problem was that seeing changed nothing, because they had already decided, long before we arrived, that beings like us were not the kind of beings whose seeing led to saving. We were bringing them an argument. They did not need an argument. They needed a reason, and we had none, and no eloquence in the galaxy can manufacture a reason where the only thing you have to offer is your existence. And our whole world was watching us go. That's the part I can hardly bear to remember. When our delegation left for the council, our people came out to see us off, millions of them, and there was a feeling among us, fragile but real, of hope. They are going to the great powers. They are going to ask for our lives. Surely the great powers will help. Parents held up their children to watch the ships that carried our petition rise into the sky. They were not naive, my people. They knew it was a long shot, but they hoped, because what else do you do when your world is dying and a chance, however small, presents itself? They hoped, and they sent us off with that hope, and I carried it the whole way, the weight of 1 billion people's belief that decency might exist. And I had to be in that chamber when I learned that it did not, that I would have to go home and tell them all that the great powers had heard us, and understood us perfectly, and let us die anyway with great sorrow, because we could not pay. I want you to see my people for a moment, because the council never did, and that was the whole of the crime. We were not remarkable. I'll be honest about that. We had no great art that the galaxy admired, no technology anyone wanted, no strategic position, no resources worth the taking. We were just a people, a few billion of us, living our small lives on our small world, loving each other and raising our young and burying our dead, and telling our stories the way every people does. We had a word in our language for the particular gold of our sun through the evening haze, and songs that our grandparents had sung to us, and quarrels and reconciliations and festivals, and the whole ordinary infinite weight of a civilization that meant everything to the people living inside it and nothing at all to anyone outside it. That was what was going to be erased. Not a strategic asset, not a resource. A whole world of someone's, every one of them as real to themselves as any council delegate was to himself, all of it about to be wiped out. And the thing I could not make the mighty understand, the thing that broke me, was that to them the erasure of all of that registered as a small matter, because the measure they used was never how much a thing mattered to itself, only how much it mattered to them. And we knew going in that we were a hard case. We weren't naive about our own smallness. We knew we had nothing to offer, nothing to trade, no leverage, none of the things that move the mighty. All we had was the truth of our situation, that we were going to die and that they could prevent it, and that surely that was enough. That a body of the galaxy's greatest civilizations, faced with a whole people's extinction that they had the power to stop, would stop it, because to not stop it was unthinkable. That was our entire case. Not it benefits you. Just, we are alive and we don't want to die and you can save us, and isn't that enough? We staked our existence on the belief that it would be enough. We were about to learn what the galaxy thought of that belief. And here is what you learn when you are small and you go before the mighty to beg for your existence. That to the mighty, you are an item on an agenda. We came before the council carrying the entire weight of our people's survival, every life on our world, our whole history and future. And to the council we were a line in a schedule, a minor matter to be dealt with between larger concerns. They heard our petition the way you'd hear a request you'd already decided to deny, politely, briefly, and without any real engagement, because the decision was not really in question. Saving us would cost them something. We could offer them nothing in return. We were not strategically valuable, not powerful enough to be worth cultivating, not anything that the cold calculus of the council's interests could justify spending resources on. And so the matter was, functionally, already decided before we ever spoke. They would express regret. They would cite the difficulties. And they would let us die because we were not worth saving, by the only measure the council had ever really used, which was, what can you do for us? I was there in the gallery when our fate was decided. I had come as part of our delegation, young and full of a desperate hope. I am embarrassed by now, certain that if we just explained clearly enough, if we just made them understand what was at stake, the great civilized powers of the galaxy would not actually let a whole people die. I believed that. I believed that the mighty must be, underneath their power, decent, that no one who could save a species would simply choose not to. I was about to be educated. The gallery itself should have warned me, if I'd known how to read it. It was a quiet, worn, sparsely occupied place, the visitors' gallery, set above and apart from the great floor where the powerful sat, and the few others scattered through it with me were, I slowly realized, the same as us. Petitioners, small peoples, representatives of the powerless, come to watch their own fates be decided by beings who would never look up at the gallery to meet their eyes. There was a hush among them that I didn't understand at first and understood completely by the end. The hush of people who have already learned what I was about to learn, who had come before the council with their own desperate hopes and had them filed under regrettably no, and who now sat in the gallery watching it happen to others with the terrible patience of the already defeated. One of them, an elder of some species I didn't know, saw the hope on my face. I must have been radiating it, young and certain as I was, and gave me a look I have never forgotten, a look of such gentle pity that it frightened me, because it was the look of someone who knew exactly how the day would end and was sorry for me that I didn't. The gallery was full of the ghosts of petitions like ours. It was a waiting room for the condemned, and I had walked into it thinking it was a place where justice might happen, and the others up there knew better, and watched me with sad old eyes, and let me find out for myself, because there was no way to tell me that I would have believed. The debate, if you could call it that, was brief and businesslike. Our case was presented. The costs of saving us were tallied. The lack of any return on the investment was noted. And one by one, The great powers of the council made the speeches that powerful bodies make when they have decided to do nothing, full of regret and sympathy, and the language of difficult choices and limited resources and the unfortunate realities of a hard galaxy. They were going to let us die, and they were going to feel appropriately sad about it, and they were going to move on to the next item, and that was simply how it went for a people like mine. I sat in the gallery and felt the future of my entire species being filed under regrettably no, and I understood, with a sick falling feeling, that decency had nothing to do with any of it, that the mighty were not secretly kind, that we were going to die because we could not pay for our lives. The speeches were the worst part, worse than a flat refusal would have been. A flat refusal would at least have been honest. Instead, the great powers competed almost to express how sorry they were, and the sorrow was real, I think, in its way, which made it more obscene, not less. One delegate spoke movingly about the tragedy of our situation, about how deeply the council felt the weight of such losses, about the heavy burden of leadership that sometimes required accepting outcomes no one wished for. Another spoke about resources, about precedent, about how saving every doomed minor species that petitioned the council was simply not feasible, about the hard arithmetic of a galaxy with finite capacity and infinite need. Another offered condolences, formal and graceful, the kind of thing you say at a funeral, except they were saying it at my people's funeral while my people were still alive and standing right there, asking only not to have the funeral at all. They had a whole practiced language for it, I realized, a smooth, sorrowful, dignified vocabulary developed over centuries specifically for the purpose of letting people die gracefully, of dressing abandonment in the robes of difficult wisdom. They had done this many times. We were not the first small people to stand before them and be regretted to death. The fluency of their sorrow was the proof of how routine our extinction was. And I watched the delegates as they made these speeches, and the thing that has stayed with me is that they were not monsters. That was almost the hardest thing to bear. They were dignified, intelligent, even kindly-seeming beings, and several of them looked genuinely troubled, and I do not think a single one of them went home that night thinking they had done something evil. They had done something responsible, in their own minds made a hard call, accepted a sad necessity, declined to throw good resources after a hopeless cause. They had a clear conscience. That was the horror of it, the thing I have never gotten over, that a whole species can be condemned to death by a room full of people who all feel they behaved well, who are all a little sad about it, who will all sleep soundly, because they have agreed, collectively, over centuries, to call the abandonment of the weak by names like prudence and realism, and the hard wisdom of leadership. No one in that room felt like a murderer. That is how the murder of a people actually happens, not with cackling villains, with sorrowful, responsible, clear consciences delegates filing it under regrettably no and moving on to the next item. And then a human spoke. The human delegation was new to the council. Humanity was a minor people too then, recently arrived, not powerful, admitted to the great body but very much at the bottom of it, the way new small species always were. And one of the humans stood when our matter was being concluded and objected, said simply that this was wrong, that a body with the power to save a whole species from extinction, and the knowledge of that species' plight, and no reason not to act except cost, that such a body letting such a people die was not a difficult choice or an unfortunate reality. It was a wrong, a plain moral wrong, and the human said so, plainly, in a room that did not use words like that. I had noticed the humans before that moment vaguely, the way you notice anyone new and minor at the edges of a great body, and I had not thought much of them. They were like us, more or less. A small people, recently arrived, seated at the bottom, granted a voice but not expected to use it for anything that mattered. New small species learned quickly at the council to be quiet, to watch, to not draw attention, to bank what little goodwill they had against the day they might need it. That was the smart play, the survival play, and every small species before the humans had learned it fast. So I had assumed the humans would do what small new species do, which is sit silently through the concluding of an unimportant matter like the death of my people, and keep their heads down, and not spend their precious thin capital objecting to a thing that was already decided and had nothing to do with them. And I watched the human who stood up, and I want to tell you what I saw because I've thought about it 10,000 times since. He was not angry exactly, or if he was, the anger was underneath something else. He looked more than anything unable not to. Do you understand? He did not look like someone making a calculated move or grandstanding or performing outrage for an audience. He looked like someone who had sat and listened to a whole people be regretted to death, and had simply reached the limit of what he could stay silent through, like a person who would have had to do violence to himself to keep his seat, and who found, when it came to it, that he could not. He stood up the way you stand up when staying seated has become physically impossible, when your own body will not let you be part of the thing happening in front of you for one more second. And he said the simple, unsophisticated thing, the thing everyone in that room had trained themselves out of ever saying, "This is wrong." And he said it not as a strategy and not as a speech, but as a confession, almost, the helpless admission of a creature who could not pretend, the way the rest of us had all learned to pretend, that what was happening was anything other than what it was. And the council laughed. That's the thing I have to make you understand because it is the hinge of everything. They laughed, not cruelly even, that was almost the worst part. They laughed the way the worldly laugh at the naive, the way the experienced laugh at the young, an indulgent, knowing, slightly embarrassed laughter at a creature that had said something so charmingly unsophisticated, so adorably new, that it could only be the product of a species that hadn't yet learned how the galaxy really worked. A wrong. As if the galaxy ran on right and wrong. As if the cold hard calculus of power and interest that governed everything could be answered by a child's word like wrong. They laughed at the human for caring, for saying out loud that a thing everyone knew was simply the way of things was actually a moral horror. And the laughter was the sound of the entire galaxy's mighty agreeing, in an instant, that caring about a doomed minor species was a quaint and foolish thing that grown-up powers had outgrown. And in the silence after the laughter, every human in that chamber stood up, all of them. Without a word, without a signal I could see, the entire human delegation rose to its feet, and they gathered their things and they walked out of the Galactic Council, out of the most important room in the galaxy, the room every species clawed and bargained to have a seat in, and they left, and the doors closed behind them, and the council sat in a sudden strange quiet, no longer laughing, not quite sure what had just happened. I want to slow down on that moment because I have replayed it more than any other moment in my life, and the details matter. It was not dramatic, the way the stories make it. There was no shouting, no grand denunciation, no threat. The humans did not make a scene. They simply stood, and the standing was the thing because in that chamber, where a seat was the most precious thing a species could possess, where every people present had fought and bargained and abased themselves for the privilege of sitting in that room, the humans rose from their seats as though the seats were nothing, as though sitting in that room while that laughter still hung in the air was the one thing they could not do. They didn't slam anything. They didn't look angry. Several of them looked, I thought, almost sad, sad the way you're sad about something you've decided you can't be part of. And they walked, unhurried, in a silence heavier than any speech, the whole length of that great chamber under the eyes of the assembled mighty, and they went out through the doors, and the doors closed, and they were gone. And the laughter had stopped. That was the first thing I noticed, the first crack in the certainty I'd been drowning in all day. The council had laughed at the human for caring, the whole room united in its worldly amusement at the naive newcomer, and then the newcomers had risen and left rather than stay, and the laughter died in the throats of the mighty, because there is something deeply unsettling about laughing at someone and watching them quietly decline to stay and be laughed at. It changes the meaning of the laughter. It turns it back on the laughers. A room full of powerful beings who had just agreed, with a chuckle, that caring was foolish, now sat in silence watching the empty seats of the only people who had cared, and the silence was not comfortable, and I saw it on their faces. The first faint discomfort of beings who had been very certain a moment ago and were, suddenly, fractionally less so. They did not understand what had happened any better than I did, but they had felt it. Something had shifted in that room when the humans walked out, some small weight moving, and even the mighty had felt the floor tilt. I did not understand it yet either. I thought in that moment that the humans had simply been offended, that their pride had been wounded by the laughter, and they'd stormed out in a huff, a small people's tantrum, meaningless. I did not understand that I had just watched something I would spend my whole life trying to comprehend. I did not know yet that the humans had not walked out away from anything. They had walked out towards something, toward us. And what they did when they reached us is the reason I am alive to tell you this. That's where I have to stop, this first time. Because what the human walkout actually meant. Why a people stood up and left the most powerful room in the galaxy rather than stay and be complicit in our deaths. And what they did after they walked out, which was not to nurse their pride but to come and do the thing the entire council had just decided was not worth doing. And how that single act, which changed nothing by any measure of power, changed everything by a measure the galaxy had forgotten it owned. That's the whole of the story, and I need you standing exactly here first. In the visitors' gallery of the Galactic Council, a young member of a doomed people watching the mighty laugh at the one creature who'd called our abandonment a wrong, and watching, uncomprehending. As every human in the room rose without a word and walked out, not knowing yet that they were walking toward me. They came to our world. That is what the walkout meant, and it is the thing no one expects, because everyone assumes a walkout is an ending, a door closing, a refusal, a turning away. For the humans, it was the opposite. The walkout was not them leaving. It was them choosing. They walked out of the council, and they did not go home and lick their wounds and write strongly worded protests. They got on their ships, the small, unimpressive ships of a small, unimpressive people, and they came to the dying world of a species they had never met, that could do nothing for them, that the entire galaxy had just agreed was not worth saving, and they started trying to save it. I have to be honest about what that looked like at first, because it was not triumphant. It was almost absurd. Humanity was minor then. They did not have the vast capacity of the great council powers, the very capacity we had begged the council for, the capacity that could have saved us easily if its owners had chosen to spend it. The humans had a fraction of that. They could not simply solve our catastrophe the way the great powers could have. When they arrived at our world and looked at the scale of what was coming for us, I watched the understanding cross their faces, that they had walked out of the one room that contained the power to save us, and come to the place where that power was needed, bringing only themselves, a small people with small means, against a disaster that the mighty had declined to face. It should have been hopeless. By every calculation of power, it was. They had made a grand gesture and now stood, a minor species, before a catastrophe that required exactly the resources they did not have. And they did not leave, that is the thing. By the cold logic of the council, by the arithmetic that had condemned us, the humans should have looked at the impossible scale of our problem, recognized that they couldn't actually fix it, and gone home, should have concluded, as the great powers had concluded, that the cost was too high and the return too low and the cause too hopeless. They had every reason the council had used, and more, because the council at least could have afforded to save us, and the humans genuinely could not. The sensible thing, the responsible thing, the realistic thing, was for the humans to discover that their grand gesture had been empty and to retreat from it gracefully. They didn't. They stayed, and they did the thing I have never stopped marveling at, the thing that taught me what humans actually are. They could not save us alone, so they refused to be alone. They began immediately doing two things at once. With one hand, they threw everything they had into the work itself, their ships, their people, their knowledge, their bodies, laboring alongside us against our catastrophe, doing what could be done even though what could be done was not enough, because they would not stand and watch when they could work. And with the other hand, they began to do the thing that actually saved us, which was to tell everyone. The humans understood something the council had counted on no one understanding, that the abandonment of my people had only been possible because it happened quietly, in a closed room, filed under regrettably no, where no one had to look at it. The great powers could let us die as long as letting us die remained an abstraction, a line item, a discreet and dignified non-decision that no one was forced to witness, and the humans dragged it into the light. They broadcast our plight across the galaxy. They documented their own absurd, undermanned, hopeless effort to save a people the council had written off, and they made sure everyone saw it. Saw the small human species pouring itself out for a doomed people that could give them nothing. Saw the catastrophe the mighty had declined to prevent. Saw, above all, the contrast between what the council could have done and what these minor newcomers were actually doing. And that contrast was a weapon more powerful than any fleet, because the galaxy watched. The galaxy watched a minor species walk out of the council rather than be complicit in our abandonment, and then go and fling itself, hopelessly, against our catastrophe, and the watching did something to the great powers that no argument ever could have. It made the abandonment visible. It took the thing they had filed under prudence and realism and the hard wisdom of leadership, and it showed it to the galaxy as what it actually was. The mighty letting a whole people die because saving them wasn't profitable, while the powerless newcomers bankrupted themselves trying to do the right thing. You cannot dress that up. You cannot make that look like wisdom. The humans had found the one thing the council's whole comfortable machinery had no defense against, which was an audience, and the spectacle of their hopeless decency, set against the council's comfortable cruelty, became a thing the great powers could not bear to be seen beside. And one by one, the great powers began to move. Not all at once, and not from any sudden access of virtue. I will not pretend they were converted to goodness. They moved because they could not stand to be the ones who watched a minor species die for a cause they had refused, with the whole galaxy looking on. They moved because the humans had made their inaction visible and therefore unbearable. A great power that had regretted us to death in a closed room found that it could not maintain that regret in the open, with the human ships already laboring over our world and the galaxy watching to see who else would come. Shame is not as noble as virtue, but it moves the mighty when virtue cannot, and the humans had weaponized it, had made the saving of my people into a test that the great powers were now failing in public, and one by one, to save their own faces if nothing else, they came. The capacity we had begged for and been denied began to arrive, not because the council had found its conscience, but because a small people had walked out of a room and made the whole galaxy watch what happened next. We were saved. My people are alive. I am alive because of it. But I need you to understand that the saving was almost the smaller miracle. The larger one was what the walkout revealed, the thing the humans knew and the rest of us had forgotten, the thing I have spent my life since trying to understand. That's where I have to stop this first time. Because what that whole thing taught me about power, and about the strange, terrible weakness hidden inside the mighty, and about why a people who had nothing were able to do what all the great powers together would not, and what became of the council and of the humans, and of a galaxy that had watched the powerless shame the powerful into decency. That's the resolution, the whole of it, and I need you standing exactly here first. Over a dying world that the mighty had abandoned, watching a small human people fling itself hopelessly against our catastrophe and drag our abandonment into the light, having walked out of the most powerful room in the galaxy not to escape it, but to go and stand in the open, where the whole galaxy could see them, with the people that room had thrown away. Here is what the walkout taught me, the thing I have spent my life since turning over, the thing that changed how I understand power and the powerful, and the strange hidden weakness that the mighty never see in themselves. The council laughed at the humans because the humans were weak. That was the whole basis of the laughter, that a minor species, a people with no power, had presumed to object to the decisions of the mighty, as though their objection could matter, as though the weak had any standing to call the strong wrong. And the laughter was correct in a sense about the power. The humans were weak. They could not force the council to do anything. They could not save my people by any exercise of strength, because they had no strength to exercise. By every measure the council understood fleets, resources, the hard capacity to make the galaxy bend. The humans were exactly as negligible as the laughter implied. And the humans defeated them anyway, not with power they didn't have, but with the one thing the powerful had forgotten could be a weapon at all, the thing the mighty had grown so secure they no longer guarded against, which was witness. The humans understood the secret that every comfortable power forgets, that the mighty are not actually all-powerful, that their power has a single hidden dependency they never think about, which is that the people they wrong must remain unwitnessed, unspoken, kept quiet, kept abstract. A great power can do almost anything, except be seen doing the thing it has agreed not to look at. The whole machinery of the council's comfortable cruelty ran on darkness, on the closed room, on the dignified language that let abandonment pass as wisdom, and the humans simply turned on the light. They could not stop the council from abandoning my people, but they could make the abandoning visible, and visibility, it turned out, was the one thing the council's power could not survive, because power that depends on no one looking is undone the moment someone refuses to look away. That was the strange, terrible weakness hidden inside the mighty, the thing I had never suspected from down in the gallery, certain of my own helplessness. That the powerful are far more fragile than they appear, that their cruelty depends utterly on complicity and quiet, and that a single people willing to stand up, walk out, and say what is happening in the open, where everyone can see, that single people, however weak, holds a power the mighty cannot match, because the mighty have built their whole order on the assumption that no one will do exactly that. The council could survive any amount of weakness arrayed against it. What it could not survive was weakness that refused to be quiet. The humans were not strong. They were loud in the deepest sense. They were the people who would not let the wrong be done in silence, and that, it turns out, is a kind of power that no fleet can answer. And it changed the galaxy. Slowly, these things are always slow, but it changed, because the humans did not stop. My people were only the first. Once humanity had discovered that the council's comfortable cruelty could not survive being witnessed, they made themselves, permanently, the witnesses. Every time the council moved to abandon some small people, to file some inconvenient species under regrettably. No, there were the humans objecting, and when laughed at, walking out and going to the abandoned, and dragging the abandonment into the light, again and again, until the great powers learned that there was now a cost to their comfortable cruelty that there had never been before. They could no longer regret peoples to death in quiet rooms, because there was a species now that would not let the room stay quiet. And so, grudgingly, resentfully, never from virtue but always from the unbearable visibility the humans imposed, the council began to save peoples it would once have abandoned, not because its heart had changed, but because the humans had made abandonment too expensive to keep choosing. The walkout that had saved my people became a thing humanity did, over and over, on behalf of the powerless, until the whole moral arithmetic of the galaxy had shifted, until the mighty could no longer assume that the weak would die quietly, because there was always, now, the chance that the humans would stand up and walk out and make the galaxy watch. People tell this story now as a tale of human pride. The Galactic Council laughed at humanity, and every human stood up and walked out, and they hear it as a story about a proud species refusing to be insulted, a grand gesture of wounded dignity, the small people too proud to be laughed at. And every time I correct them because I was in that gallery, and I know why they walked out, and it had nothing to do with their pride. They did not walk out because they had been insulted. They walked out because we had been condemned, and they would not sit in the room where it was done. The walkout was never about the laughter at them. It was about the death sentence on us. The thing the laughter was defending, the thing everyone in that room had agreed to call wisdom. The humans did not leave to protect their dignity. They left to refuse their complicity, and then they did the thing that made the leaving mean something, which was to go and stand openly with the people the room had thrown away, and to make the galaxy look at what it had done. That is what I learned, the thing I have tried to become, that the answer to the comfortable cruelty of the powerful is not more power. It is witness. It is the refusal to stay seated, the refusal to be quiet, the willingness to stand up and walk out of the comfortable room and go stand with the condemned in the open, where everyone can see. The humans were weak, and they were right, and they discovered that being right out loud in front of everyone is stronger than being mighty in the dark. My whole people are alive because a small species understood that, because when the mighty laughed at the word wrong, the humans did not argue with the laughter. They simply stood up and walked out of the laughter, and went to find the ones the laughter was killing, and refused, in front of the entire galaxy, to look away. They walked out of the most powerful room in the galaxy, and it turned out that the door they walked through was the only thing in that whole chamber that had any power at all, because everyone inside had agreed to pretend the suffering outside it wasn't real, and the humans were the only ones willing to get up, open the door and go out to where the suffering was and stand in it, and say to the comfortable mighty behind them, "We would rather be out here with them than in there with you." I have spent my life trying to be the kind of creature who would walk through that door. I learned it from a people who had no power and used the only thing they had, the refusal to stay seated while a wrong was done, and saved my whole world with it. The council laughed at humanity for caring. And humanity stood up and walked out and proved that caring, when it refuses to sit down and be quiet, is the most powerful force in the galaxy. The one thing, in the end, that the mighty could not laugh away, because you cannot laugh at an empty chair, and you cannot unsee the ones who left it to go and stand with the dying.